Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 30 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, which is set to begin April 23rd, no longer in Vegas due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we are moving forward, and it looks like, according to ESPN, GMs and front offices really getting prepared for more of a virtual draft from home. So the war room really is going to look a lot different. I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of Zoom conversations going on, a lot of meetings happening that way. And really, we're in unprecedented times. You're looking at the league now, front offices not able to bring guys in and have private workouts. Can't really have them there on site and really put them in front of a whiteboard. Obviously, they can still do that over Skype or over Zoom, over things like that, be able to FaceTime them and have some of those conversations and interactions, but you don't really get to sit down and actually have a face-to-face and actually have them there at your facility. And for the players, a lot of the guys that were expecting to show what they can do at their pro days really weren't able to do that because obviously with the outbreak and the pandemic, they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to have their pro days. There are a few teams that before we really went under the shelter in place and such, they were actually able to have a pro day. But for the most part, a lot of guys that, for whatever reason, whether it was injury or by choice, they decided they weren't going to work out, they really didn't get a chance to showcase what they can do for all the teams. I know that there are some guys that are trying to do so individually, and sending out video of their performances. And, I think that's really the best that we can do right now. And with this podcast, just like we've done in the last few podcasts, I want to first start by saying that I want to continue to do my podcasts. I know that like I said, we are in unprecedented times. And right now, I think everybody needs this release. They need to have something else that they can focus on and talk about. And frankly, I said this in the last episode, it's a release for me. I can go and for an hour or so, really just immerse myself in the draft and not have to worry about anything else. Be able to just talk about the draft, talk about the NFL. What does the 2020 NFL football season look like? And be able to take my mind off of things. And I hope that this podcast will continue to do that for you as well. Now, what I've been doing with these last few podcasts is really taking you on a tour of all 32 teams by division to see really what the free agent market has done to each of the teams in terms of their depth chart. What does that look like? And really, how does that impact the NFL draft? And what I'm doing is really going through, I started off really just focusing on the first 4 rounds, but I have a full 7-round mock draft put together, and I'm going to have that out here on the website by tomorrow at the very latest. Full 7-round mock, and for that, we'll go ahead and with today's podcast, we'll focus on the AFC South, and we'll go ahead and cover all 7 rounds. Ironically enough, when we look at this, only 2 of the 4 AFC South teams do not have a first-round pick. But when you look at Indianapolis and Houston, the 2 teams that don't, I think there's going to be a lot of draft day drama, if you will. I think these are 2 teams that could potentially trade into round number 1. There's Indianapolis, who they have Phillip Rivers there at the helm at the quarterback position, but are they going to really look at him after the first couple of years? They're going to need a guy that's going to come in and really be the face of the franchise. And Jacoby Brissett, given the keys to the program, and really just hasn't been able to set himself apart and really show that he can be a franchise quarterback. So Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, whoever's not taken, I could absolutely see Chris Ballard trading back into round number 1. He already has his 3 technique. He was already quoted as saying at the combine that, you know what, the 3 technique is really what drives things. And, he got his 3 technique, and he has 2 picks in round number 2 now. So he can potentially package those picks, trade back into round number 1, and get the quarterback that isn't taken in the top 10. I don't see 4 quarterbacks being taken in the top 10. I think there will be 3, and that 4th quarterback, whoever falls, whether it is Justin Herbert or Jordan Love, I think Chris Ballard will get his quarterback of the future. And then Houston trades DeAndre Hopkins to Arizona. I think that was a trade that shocked everyone. What was going on? Bill O'Brien, ESPN reported that Bill O'Brien said that DeAndre Hopkins was looking for a raise, a significant raise. And that was a big reason why he was traded. So Houston's going to be looking for their number 1 wideout. Who's that going to be? And will Houston trade into round number 1? It's entirely possible. So we'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at who might still be available in round number 2 based on my mock draft. But we're going to go ahead and kick things off with Jacksonville, and we'll move from Jacksonville to Tennessee and then Indianapolis, and then we'll close out with Houston, really going through how the picks would be in order. And really, Indianapolis has a 2nd round pick before Houston. So that's why we'll go ahead and do Indianapolis 3rd, and then we'll close out with the Houston Texans. So Jacksonville, the Jaguars. Let's take a look at what's going on with them. I think this is going to be a pick that really is going to be interesting, to say the least. I thought that 2019 really saw the birth of Minshew mania in Jacksonville. Gardner Minshew taking over for the injured Nick Foles. Breakout campaign at quarterback, but the Jags finished at the bottom of the AFC South, find themselves drafting in the top 10 yet again. Jags finished in the bottom 3rd of the league on defense, and their 28th ranked run defense was especially disappointing. Now Marcell Dareus, cap casualty, he's no longer there. That really leaves Taven Bryan and Avery Jones as the only defensive tackles really that had significant playing time from a season ago. Now, if you look at the Jaguars and you look at them up front, they really haven't done anything in free agency outside of bringing in Rodney Gunter, free agent acquisition from Arizona. But that's not really going to move the needle when you are talking about a run defense that ranked 28th in the league. I think Derrick Brown is a guy that the Jaguars they have to covet. They have to look at Derrick Brown and say, this is a guy who is really explosive, the power, the quickness off the football. This is a guy that has some freakish measurables and just freakish ability out on the football field. But even with him off the board, I think they still go defensive tackle, because when you have an athletic specimen like Javon Kinlaw, big 6'5", 324-pounder out of South Carolina, this dude can push the pocket from within as an interior pass rusher and can also be stout at the point of attack against the run. He's going to be on the board, and I think he could be a top 10 pick. Now, Kinlaw, he went to Columbia, South Carolina as a JUCO All-American, became an instant contributor as a sophomore in 2017 after shedding 40 pounds. Named defensive MVP in 2018, racked up 9 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and then finished the year with 6 sacks, named first-team All-American in 2019. But those stats don't tell the entire story. Javon Kinlaw at times was incredibly dominant at the point of attack. This guy, first off, powerfully built and an intimidating presence who you want coming off the bus first. A tone setter there on the field, very quick first step, uses that to get penetration off the snap, muscles through gaps, powering through double teams to collapse the pocket from within. Very powerful punch at the line to jolt his blocker, uses the club and rip move to beat his man, who's now gotten off balance because of that. And if you watch the Senior Bowl, this guy was virtually unblockable. Power and speed combo to win at the point of attack. And when you look at John Simpson, Clemson guard, who's one of the better and more physical guards in all of college football and will be a day 2 pick when it's all said and done. He was repeatedly beating even him, driving him back with a tremendous bull rush, or using his quickness to beat him off the ball. And it was one of those things, his Senior Bowl was just ridiculous. I would have loved to see him play in the game, but he shut things down before we could actually see that happen. His strength allows him to bench press that interior lineman, get off that block, and disrupt the run plays. What makes him so difficult to handle is his motor never stops. He's always working to the football, doesn't take a play off. And he's somebody who I look at Javon Kinlaw. I think he's a special player and a guy who can just wreak havoc in opposing backfield. 17 tackles for loss, really made an impact there in 2018 and 2019. So 15 of those 17 tackles for loss coming in those 2 seasons, and 10 sacks as well. 8 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries as well. So this guy knows what to do when he gets there and is after the football. As dominant as he can be, any of his momentum can be neutralized when his pad level gets too high. That's one of the things that we talked about with Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown would stand up at times off the ball, and when that happens, as an offensive lineman, I've got much more surface area to work with than if you're firing low off the ball. And when Kinlaw fires low off the ball, good luck trying to handle the speed and the power. I think Kinlaw does need to work on some of his technique, keep that pad level consistent, keeping it down. But he actually he absolutely has that athletic skill set to wreak havoc as an interior lineman. He's one of my favorite players to watch. I thought he was a guy who just continued as the season progressed, just got better and better. Almost 35-inch arms, so he's got really long arms as well. So when you're talking about bench pressing, he doesn't really even have to worry about necessarily getting an interior lineman getting into his body, because he's so quick with his hands. He's able to extend and then get a quick either club or a rip or even an arm over, and he's by the interior lineman shooting into the backfield. So tremendously explosive player and a guy who is fun to watch. And I think you put him in there for Jacksonville. Javon Kinlaw is starting week 1. So you take a look at Jacksonville. They have 2 first-round picks. And so what are they going to do at number 20? And I think that's a big question mark. Jacksonville gets this pick from the Rams in the Jalen Ramsey trade. I think they have to continue to address some of the pieces lost in the offseason. I mentioned, Marcell Dareus, they're replacing him at number 9. I think they still stay defense. Trey Herndon, solid year at corner. They added Rashawn Melvin to replace AJ Boye, but who was traded to Denver, by the way. But they never really truly replaced Jalen Ramsey. So there's the chance that a corner, possibly Trevon Diggs, could go there. I think Trevon Diggs is going to be off the board. I think he's going number 17 overall to the Dallas Cowboys. So if he's off the board, then that really, I think this is too early for Christian Fulton at this point. So I think the Jags will probably look at day 2 to bring in a corner. So they did use the emergence of Josh Allen allowed them to let go of Calais Campbell. But the long-term future of Yannick Ngakoue is still in question. And I think that's really the area that you have to focus on. The Jaguars did use the franchise tag on Ngakoue, but I don't know, I just don't see him signing a long-term deal to remain in Jacksonville beyond 2020. And there's still a possibility that he could get traded at some point this offseason. That's one of the names that you see thrown around online as a possibility of still being traded. So I look at it either way. I think it would behoove Jacksonville to prepare for life after Ngakoue. And I'm looking at AJ Epinesa. It sounds a little weird because in the last couple of podcasts, I've talked about how, look, it's too early for Epinesa. A lot of people are talking about him as a potential 3rd-round pick because he ran a 5.04 and that really speaks to his lack of explosiveness as an athlete. But look, this guy can play. When you're talking about a guy, what you see there is he's technically sound. He plays with excellent power. And he's just an intelligent football player, high football IQ. Came to Iowa City as a 5-star recruit there, highly decorated high school career, made an impact as a rotational player, as a true freshman, with 5.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. 2018 backed up Anthony Nelson and Parker Hesse, but still managed to lead the Big Ten in sacks with 10.5. Think about that. This guy was a rotational player and was still leading the conference in sacks. As a junior, got off to a real slow start, just 3.5 sacks through the first 8 games, but he poured it on when it counted. In Big Ten play, finished the season with 8 sacks in his final 5 games. And again, it doesn't take long to in studying him to see that he's not the explosive edge rusher. Burst is just average, stiffness in his hips when he tries to turn the corner. But if you're looking for a lightning quick edge rusher to bring speed to your defense, Epinesa is not going to be your guy. But I look at Josh Allen. Josh Allen is your speed rusher. I think this is going to be a guy who's going to be more of that power in the bull rush coming off the edge. I mentioned the technique, the power, and his hands, along with a motor that never quits, which all allow him to create a soft edge and make plays getting to the quarterback. He's a guy who fires off the line, looking to strike with very heavy-handed. By the way, fires off the ball, stuns the lineman, keeps working with his hands as he looks to try to beat the tackle to the corner. The handwork, you'll see a variety of moves, whether it's a club rip or a slap rip, a chop, an arm over. He's always looking to attack the offensive tackle's hands, and then that allows him to gain the advantage turning the corner. Intelligent pass rusher, showing an outside rush, getting the offensive tackle to overset, then crossing the face of the offensive lineman to shoot the gap and get an inside rush to the quarterback. On his bull rushes, excellent hand placement, extending his arms underneath the tackle's armpit to then jack his man back and collapse the pocket from the edge. Really effective long arm to drive the offensive tackle into the backfield, using his hands to quickly disengage and pursue the ball carrier after just long arming him, getting his hand right into the pad level there, just driving his man back. Let's see. Maybe his most effective pass rush move is the push-pull. And there are some guys who can really use that effectively, and there are some guys that try it and it just doesn't work. But his is very effective. That power, as I said, he gets that lineman off balance, and then he's able to explode by, shoot the gap, and get penetration into the backfield. You'll see him line inside at defensive tackle on passing downs, and those push-pull moves are extremely effective when engaging the guard off the snap as well. Now, if you watch that Holiday Bowl against USC, and I mentioned this when I was talking about Austin Jackson a couple of podcasts ago, Epinesa squared off against Austin Jackson, who I have coming off the board number 33 overall. When Epinesa was able to use his power in his hands, he was very effective in creating that soft edge to beat Jackson. Delivered several hits on the fabulous freshman Keaton Slovis there at USC. Chopped down on his arm as he tried to throw on one play, forcing a key turnover in the game. Ended up hurting Slovis's shoulder. Just ended up being a strain, but really knocked him out of the game at that point. If Jackson, though, was able to use his quickness, he was able to mirror Epinesa and usually push him away from the pocket. And that was the thing that Epinesa is going to struggle with the more athletic tackles at the next level. I think he's going to continue to learn, how he can be effective even against those more athletic tackles by using his hands and using that technique, using the power, and that's really going to be his game. And look, Epinesa is not a top 10 pick by any means. That was originally what the hype was that Epinesa was going to be a top 10 pick. But I think he's technically sound. He's a guy who I think can still start and have a productive career at the next level. And look, Jacksonville, they had Calais Campbell, who wasn't necessarily the most explosive defensive end, but very powerful, excellent handwork, very intelligent player, very technically sound. And I just see this as being a guy who can come in there and take the place of Calais Campbell. Now, look, I know Calais Campbell is a guy who was a multi-Pro Bowl player, and he's one of my favorite guys in the league for everything that he does, both on and off the field. So you can't really replace him. But I think when you're talking about putting a guy in who mirrors the type of game that Calais Campbell has, I think AJ Epinesa can absolutely do that. And why not at number 20? who else is on there at this point that you're going to go ahead and take? I think if you get Epinesa in there, that really solidifies the defensive front. When you're talking about a defense that, ranked, 28th in the league against the run, in the bottom third overall, you have to address that defense, really from within first, and then focus on some of the other areas. So I think if Jacksonville can do that, you got a defensive tackle, defensive end, then absolutely in round number 2, you can go ahead and focus on some other things. I'm looking at a cornerback position, because frankly, yes, they brought in Rashaan Melvin. They have DJ Hayden on the roster. They have Trey Herndon, but they need a guy who, they're trying to replace Jalen Ramsey. And really, when you're talking about a guy who was a top 10 pick, it's very difficult to replace that type of talent. But I think what you do need to do is continue to find guys who are athletic there on the outside, who can make plays. And I'm looking at Noah Igbenogany out of Auburn. And the reason for this is, he's very athletic. I think, that adds to some of that athleticism that they're trying to look for to upgrade up front. And, I'm sorry, on the outside. And I think Igbenogany, he's 5'10", 198 pounds, the junior, 18 pass breakups in his career, only 1 interception. So there is a little cause for concern there in terms of, okay, he can make plays on the football, but is he truly going to be a guy who can finish? Can he actually pick the ball off? And that's a legitimate concern there. And I think that's why some people talk about him as a first round pick. I think that's why he won't be a first round pick, is because of that. I think, you do see the instincts, you see his ability to break quickly on the football, and then his athleticism there in the kicking game. He, as a kick returner, has 2 kickoff returns for touchdown. In 2019, only 9 kickoff returns, but he had more, averaged 35.2 yards per kickoff return, which, was his best by far, in his 3 seasons there at Auburn. A guy who is tremendously gifted athletically. And I think when you look at the group that they have there already, they don't have the athlete that Igbenogany is. You look at Melvin, at Hayden, at Herndon. I think they're solid corners. I think they're guys who can play obviously can play, but I don't think they're as gifted athletically as Noah Igbenogany. Igbenogany ran a 4.48 at the combine, a 37-inch vertical leap as well. I think this makes a lot of sense, especially sitting there in round number 2. And frankly, I think the Jags continue to focus on their defense, focus on really shoring up the defense a little bit. And in round number 3, I actually have the Jags taking a safety. Now you're looking at this going, all right, well, offensively, they weren't a juggernaut. Why aren't they addressing the offense? And just wait, we're going to get there. We'll get to the offensive side of the football as well. But in round number 3, I'm looking at Ashton Davis, a safety out of California, out of Cal Berkeley, 6'1", 202. Ashton Davis, a track star there, for the Bears, and a guy who I think could step in and really challenge, Jared Wilson, for that free safety spot. They have Andrew Wingard, who I thought filled in nicely there for a time when Wilson went down to injury. But I don't know that he's going to be the long-term answer there if there's issues there with Wilson. I don't know that Wilson had a decent year last year, but I think they can still do better. I think they can still have an upgrade there at the position. Wilson signed through the 2021 season, but I think, you get some good depth there at the position. And with Ashton Davis, what you're getting, again, is an athlete on the back end, a guy who's relatively new to the game of football. So that's one of the things. I think that's why his draft stock would bring him down to the 3rd round. I think he's still a day 2 guy, but I think 3rd round feels about right. He does have 7 interceptions, including 4 in 2018, 12 pass breakups, a guy who just flies around to the football, plays well over the top, really a guy that can play off the ball. He started his career at Cal as a corner, transitioned to the safety position in 2018, and that's really where his home is. And I look at Jacksonville, they address the defensive line in round number one with their 2 picks there. And then in the second and third round, they address the secondary, which then allows them to focus on the offense. And I know what you're going to say when you look at Jacksonville and you say, all right, well, you have them addressing a lot of these other positions. What about the linebacking core? And I look at Myles Jack, I look at, at Leon Jacobs. I think they're solid linebackers. They also drafted Quincy Williams, who they really like. And they brought in a middle linebacker by the name of Joe Schobert. If you haven't seen this guy play, he's really a lot of fun to watch. At Cleveland, finally a Pro Bowler, a guy who just, he's a volume tackler, but he's so much more than that. He can drop into coverage. His presence there allows Myles Jack to move back outside, which is really where he should be. He was playing out of position last year, playing in the middle at times, and I think that really played into some of the issues that Jacksonville had on defense. So I thought Schobert, bringing him in, that really changed the whole complexion of the focus for the draft. They can focus on the other areas of that defense. And then really after that, let's look at the offense a little bit. So offensively, you're talking, okay, you got Gardner Minshew there at quarterback. What are they going to do on day 3? And I think when you look at it, they need a tight end. They have Tyler Eifert, who they brought in from Cincinnati. So it tempers this a little bit, and there's still a chance that you may move off of the tight end position. They brought in Josh Oliver a year ago from San Jose State. James O'Shaughnessy on the roster, but I'm still looking to try to find another pass catcher for Minshew. And I'm looking at a guy like Hunter Bryant out of Washington. Now, Hunter Bryant, this was a guy who was a favorite target of Jacob Eason's, and a guy who just made a lot of explosive plays. So I was expecting him to light it up at the combine, but he ran a 4.7 4.40. And so that was, cause for concern. He did put up 225 23 times, so there is some strength to this guy. His 3-cone drill ran a 7.08 3-cone drill, which was second fastest only to Adam Troutman, the big 6'5" tight end out of Dayton, who I have going to the Patriots. I think that's a match made in heaven. But I look at Hunter Bryant. He's 6'2", 248, and when you have a guy who's 6'2", some people had him as a mid day 2 pick. But when you're running a 4.74, look, Evan Engram was 6'2", in the 6'2" to 6'3" range, and he ran in the 4.4s at the combine. Ultimately was a first-round pick. Hunter Bryant, not that type of player. He's kind of a big-bodied receiver, really. When that was how Washington utilized him, and that's where I see him, at least initially, until he continues to work on his blocking. I think that's initially where you're going to see him, whether it's lined up in the slot, lined up on the outside, try to take advantage of some of the mismatches there on the outside. And really, his breakout year was his junior season in 2019. 52 catches, 825 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the year. A guy who averaged over 16 yards per reception in his career with the Huskies. And I look at it, I just think you need to continue to find weapons for Gardner Minshew. And so Hunter Bryant, there are teams that are going to be looking for tight ends, either at end of day 2, early on day 3. I think you got to get your tight end while you can. And some people will say, well, why not get a wide receiver right here? I think you can really, there's enough depth to where you can wait just a little bit to get your wide receiver. And so in round 4, Jacksonville, their first pick there was at 116. They get a second, 4th round pick, and that's 137. They got that from San Francisco. And here's where they get the receiver, KJ Hamler out of Penn State. Now, if you recall, a couple of podcasts ago, I had KJ Hamler going to Cleveland. And I had him going in round number 3. And I looked at that. The more I looked at it, the more I watched KJ Hamler play. This is a guy, not a natural pass catcher. Really, he's a guy who is explosive getting down the field, but the hands, the drops. He doesn't look comfortable. Very much a body catcher at times. So the explosiveness absolutely there, but he has such inconsistent hands that it really worries me. And so I moved him down as a result. I look at Devin Duvernay, and that's who I have going to Cleveland in round number 3 now. I've changed my draft up just a little bit, and that's what I was saying. My draft is very fluid, and that's part of the fun of the draft is trying to project. And the more you sit there and you look at a player, or you look at a team, especially if you have some of the different free agent acquisitions, that's going to change the whole complexion of your mock draft. So the more I studied KJ Hamler, the more I said he needs to drop a little bit. And I think, in round 4, that's probably going to be about the right value for him. You've got DJ Chark, D.D. Westbrook, Marquise Lee, there on the outside with Keelan Cole, Chris Conley. They need another receiver in this passing game. And I think KJ Hamler has that explosiveness. If KJ Hamler can, really showcase, his hands and show that he can hold on to the football with consistency. This is a guy with, this past season, Sean Clifford throwing him the football, 56 catches, 904 yards and 8 touchdowns on the year. A guy who averaged right around 17 yards per reception. You have him lined up in the slot with Westbrook and Lee. Lee's going to be another slot guy, but you have Chark and Westbrook likely on the outside. Chris Conley as well. This is a slot player and a guy who, if Hamler can ball out, then you could potentially see Jacksonville saying goodbye to Marquise Lee. I think that's one of the guys that could potentially be expendable. So will be interesting to see what happens there. But I think, like I said, this is the right value for KJ Hamler, in my opinion. So you're looking at round number 5, and I'm going back to the defensive side of the football. I mentioned at the cornerback position, I want to see him get one more corner. And I'm looking at Isang Bassi. Now, Isang Bassi out of Wake Forest was one of my favorite corners to watch. And I think, a big part of that was because of his aggressiveness. A guy who was willing to come up and make plays, and come up and tackle. Very physical tackler, has 227 tackles in his career, 12 and a half tackles for loss in his career as well. So a guy who likes to make plays behind the line, especially in run support. But the ball skills are absolutely evident. 5 interceptions in his career, but 45 pass breakups. And when you're looking at that, that's 16 in 2017, 15 in 2018, and 11 in 2019. Also had 3 as a true freshman in 2016. I mean, a guy who, just very consistent with his ability to make plays on the football. He'll gamble at times. He'll get beaten. He's 5'9", 191, ran a 4.46 40 at the combine, 39.5-inch vertical leap, exceptional athlete. And look, Bassi could potentially move into round number 4. If he falls to round 5, I think this is really good value for the Jaguars. And if you get Bassi in there to team with Igbenogany, then you're talking about, okay, Melvin, Hayden, Herndon, Igbenogany, and Bassi, in my opinion, you've upgraded your cornerback position this offseason tremendously. And again, one player isn't going to replace Jalen Ramsey, but when you're able to bring in that type of depth to the position, I think that's one of the things. That's a way that you can account for losing a player of Ramsey's status, and his loss isn't going to impact them quite as much, I don't think. So you look at the offensive line, still in round number 5, their second, 5th round pick, and I'm looking at Alex Taylor, the big 6'8" tackle out of South Carolina State. Now, why are we looking tackle here? They did take Jawan Taylor a season ago. He's manning the right side. You look at Cam Robinson over on the left side. Cam Robinson's battled some injuries. Really, I think, Robinson is better suited as a guard more than anything else. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the season. And so he'll be at the end of his rookie deal. So there's a chance that after the season is over, Cam Robinson may end up moving elsewhere. And even if he does stay again, he could kick inside to guard. And Taylor's 6'8", 308, ran a 509.40 at the combine, despite that size. Was able to get that body moving pretty quickly. Huge hands, 11.25-inch hands, 36 and an eighth inch wingspan as well. And with those long arms, still put up 225 21 times, which is pretty impressive for that kind of length. This is a guy who I think needs to hit an NFL weight room immediately. His legs, if you look at him, he's got, for lack of a better term, he's got chicken legs. He's got a very small lower body. So he's really got to put some weight on that lower body to be able to anchor against, the powerful edge rushers in the NFL. So I don't think he's necessarily a guy who's going to, he could probably fill in as a spot starter, but he won't be ready to step in right away. And like I said, if I'm looking at Cam Robinson, if Alex Taylor, if he can really address that lower body strength, because he does have some skills athletically moving laterally, I'm looking at Cam Robinson. Obviously Andrew Norwell signed the biggest deal there for an offensive guard. You got Taylor at right tackle. You could potentially talk about moving on from AJ Cann at the right guard position. AJ Cann, they've been talking about that for years. Is AJ Cann going to be moving on? He's signed through 2021. So there's a good chance you could see, if Cam Robinson is re-signed, he may stay there at left tackle for another year, allow Alex Taylor to really fully develop, and then let AJ Cann walk, move Cam Robinson to guard, and let Alex Taylor man that tackle position. As it is, there's no depth behind Robinson at left tackle, so immediately Alex Taylor would be the backup there at left tackle, and hopefully Cam Robinson can stay healthy. So that's really what I look at for Jacksonville in round number 5. Now moving on to round 6, and I'm looking at another receiver. Again, trying to find more weapons, and so I'm looking at this and looking at some of the dynamic here with a lot of these receivers, a lot of explosive guys, and on the roster. And I was looking for a guy who could be at that potential possession type receiver. And I'm looking at Benjamin Victor out of Ohio State, 6'4", 198, really long arms, over 34-inch arms, ran a 4.640 at the combine, only put up 225 9 times, which is, is a bit of a concern. That 4.640, not a burner, but at Ohio State, these receivers, they run exceptional routes. Whether it's Terry McLaurin to KJ Hill, these guys run tremendous routes, and Benjamin Victor is no different. And, I think he's one of those guys, was kind of the forgotten man when you talk about Ohio State receivers. And Victor, in his career, just 83 receptions, had 35 this past season for 1,340 yards, 573 this past season, 18 touchdowns though, 6 this past season. So average 16.1 yards per reception. So a guy, he knows how to get open, can be that weapon. And, if you've got these receivers that are pushing it down the field with your D.D. Westbrooks, with your DJ Charks, with your KJ Hamlers, Marquise Lee likes to run a lot of the underneath routes, run a lot of drags and such. And I think this could be another possession receiver, a guy that is going to find ways to get open. I think just looking for a different dynamic, I think, that'd be the right value for Victor in the 6th round. I think some people have him going higher, but I think 6th round would be nice value at that point. So staying in the 6th round, I think they finally go with a linebacker, because, frankly, I think there are other needs that they really need to shore up. And I'm looking at Dele Harding out of Illinois, 6'1", 230 pounds. And Harding, look, really got 1 year to shine there in Lovie Smith's defense there with the Illini. But, man, did he produce. 149 tackles, second in the country, to Evan Weaver, 14 tackles for loss, also 3 interceptions on the year. 2 of those were brought back to the house as well. So a guy who not only can make plays on the football, but was making some big plays there for the Illini, who finally made it to a bowl game He was one of the big reasons why Illinois was so effective defensively in the Big Ten. And I look at Harding. Look, he wasn't invited to the combine, but that's okay. Not everybody at the combine is, not everybody who's not selected for the combine. There's still a chance for you to get drafted. Usually what ends up happening if you're not invited to the combine, you're probably more than likely going to end up being a 6th or 7th round pick. And I look at Harding, he has some versatility. He's a guy who played in the middle there for the Illini, but I think he could probably move outside and be an outside backer, whether it's strong side, weak side. I think he can potentially move Miles Jack over to the strong side if Harding were to be the weak side backer. You've got Leon Jacobs on the roster, Quincy Williams as well. So I think there are some players that they already have there on the roster, but I think adding Harding, I think he'd challenge Joe Giles Harris as Schobert's backup in the middle as well. Could be a special teams performer, really perform well, but I think he really adds some really good depth. And I actually had him at one point penciled in with the Patriots because that really feels like a Patriot type player with the way that Harding just plays with his hair on fire. But he diagnoses very quickly, no wasted movement, trusts his eyes, and it's read and react, and let's go after the football. So I think Harding in the 6th round, I like that pick there. And then looking at round number 7, another guy who wasn't invited to the combine, but if you look at the quarterback position and you're looking at Gardner Minshew, Josh Dobbs, and then nobody else. So I'm looking at Tyler Huntley. I went a little bit differently here. There's some other guys that were on the board around this time. You could potentially bring in, Steven Montez, Jake Luton out of Oregon State. But I went with Huntley because, there's the athleticism. This was a guy, he's only 6'1", 205, but a career 67.2% completion percentage. And really, for the Utes, he was awesome in 2019. Completed over 73% of his passes, over just under 3,100 yards, 19 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. And, he also was able to do it on the ground. In his career, over 1,100 yards on the ground, 16 touchdowns. So he has that athleticism as well. And I think he's a guy that belongs on an NFL roster. I don't know that he'll ever be a full-time starter in the league, but I think he could be a guy who could be a solid backup. I think that's probably a ceiling, but you're looking at a guy who can absolutely come onto this roster, be the third quarterback, learn from Dobbs, learn from Minshew, and his athleticism could even get him on the field. There are teams that are looking at the success of Taysom Hill and what he was able to provide. So you could potentially see some packages run for Tyler Huntley and get him out onto the field sooner rather than later. I think that's something that may not be out of the question there for Jacksonville. So those are all of Jacksonville's selections. So we're going to go ahead and transition to the Tennessee Titans. Now Tennessee, really, they battled in the playoffs, and really the resurgence of Ryan Tannehill, coming to the Titans and took over the job for Marcus Mariota, and he really led that team, from a wild card to the AFC Championship. And look, he was re-signed and he'll be under center in 2020. That really allows Tennessee to focus on defense a little bit. I think their secondary was exposed against Kansas City. Not only that, they experienced a slew of injuries. Malcolm Butler ended up on IR due to a broken wrist. Adoree Jackson battled foot and knee injuries. Logan Ryan, Tremaine Brock, LaShawn Sims, Ty Smith, all unrestricted free agents. Really leaves Butler and Jackson, and then Kareem Orr as the only corners on the roster heading into the offseason. Now, Tennessee, really hasn't done a whole lot there at the cornerback position. What have they, they really haven't signed anyone of note. So there's a good chance that you could be seeing them taking a corner with this pick. I think that absolutely is potentially in the cards. I think, finding somebody, sitting there at 29, you know, the way I have the draft shaking out right now is I have, let's see, I have Diggs and Fulton coming off the board. So the next corners you're talking about Arnett, Igbenogany, Gladney, Jeff Gladney, Bryce Hall, AJ Terrell. I just don't see any of those guys being first round picks. I think from a need standpoint versus best player available or potentially addressing other needs, I think corner at this point doesn't make a whole lot of sense here. Now the Jarrell Casey trade, also had to be caused to push that pause button on a corner here as well. Tennessee trading that 5-time Pro Bowler to Denver for a 7th round pick, clearly a cost cutting move. Casey lined up at the 3 technique. That's going to allow Jeffrey Simmons to move from 5 technique to 3 technique. So they're going to be looking at adding obviously a 5 technique. And I'm looking at Ross Blacklock out of TCU. If they want to go that route, this is a guy who has the explosiveness and Ben, just a twitched up dude, intriguing rush potential. That could be a potential direction that they go. But I still think this pick is going to be used to actually protect Ryan Tannehill. Now the line gave up 56 sacks a season ago, which is 3rd highest total in the league. And then they lose Jack Conklin in free agency going to Cleveland. So that only furthers the need to address that offensive line. Now, yes, Conklin's backup, Dennis Kelly, was re-signed. He's going to get the first crack at the starting position, but Titans can do better than Dennis Kelly. And I'm looking at Josh Jones out of Houston, 6'5", 319, can play both tackle positions, really excelled there at the left tackle position for the Cougars. Pro Football Focus noted that he was one of the more consistent tackles in all of college football, allowing just 18 pressures on 1,282 pass blocking snaps. So when you talk about that, this is a guy who just knows how to get it done as a pass blocker. Mainstay on that left tackle spot, 45 career starts under his belt. Often got by with sheer athleticism more than technique. So I think that does need to be cleaned up by the NFL position coach. But he absolutely has the lower body flexibility required to bend at the knees, maintain leverage, very light on his feet for a guy his size, able to fire quickly out of his stance, has a lateral agility to easily mirror defenders, both on an outside rush and with counter moves back to the inside. Not only do you see him see it throughout the season, but the lateral quickness was also on display at the Senior Bowl. Continually showed quick feet to pick up Kenny Willekes and Alton Robinson back inside on counter moves. Has the strength required to absorb the edge rusher's punch coming off the edge and maintains active hands. Will lose his anchor at times, and he'll start bending at the waist, starts lunging and leaning, getting himself off balance. I think his kick slide is effective when he gets a deep set and takes the proper angle to beat the defensive end to the edge. But what'll happen a lot of times is he'll take more of a shallow kick slide, and sometimes he'll end up only, even being horizontal. When you're doing that with an edge rusher that's coming off the edge and really attacking that corner, he's going to beat you off the edge. And so that's one of the things he needs to make sure that he's consistently getting that deep set in his pass sets in order to really wall off that defensive end coming off the edge. I think he will also get a bit overzealous at times with his and will overset, which also leaves him susceptible to getting beaten inside. And look, Houston was always known for its passing, but it was really the running game where I thought Jones was really able to show off some of his athleticism. Often a lead blocker for the running back, getting out in front on the edge to kick out the linebacker, drive him all the way to the sideline, easily climb into the second level, locating the defender under control, sealing off his man. And when he maintains leverage, and this is another guy who, his pad level wants to rise at times, but if he can maintain leverage, he can generate a lot of movement in the ground game, which has to be music to the ears of Derrick Henry. Their beast, running the ball. And look, Jones, he does need a bit of development to his game. And I think, having Dennis Kelly on the roster, can allow them to have him at least to start off the year. But you've got Josh Jones on the roster and a guy who clearly has potential to start early in his career. And I think you clean things up. He'll battle Dennis Kelly for that starting position and could potentially take over that starting role here sooner rather than later. So when you look at Tennessee on day 2, I think that's when you go corner. I'm looking at AJ Terrell, and to me, that just makes a whole lot of sense. I think some people have Terrell potentially coming off the board a lot earlier. Some are even saying potentially in round number 1. And I actually had AJ Terrell at one point penciled in my mock draft, possibly even going round number 1. And I didn't feel right about it. I think it's one of those things when you talk about AJ Terrell, I think the last memory you really had of him as a Clemson Tiger, it really left a lot to be desired against Jamar Chase and LSU. I do think that one game doesn't define a 3-year career with more ups than downs. His performances in the 2 previous games played a pivotal role in the Tigers' success. Look against Virginia in the ACC championship. May have only had 2 tackles in the game, but he excelled playing with inside leverage, repeatedly turning to run with the receiver, pinning his man to the sideline, not allowing any separation, and taking away any option for Bryce Perkins, the quarterback. Then in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, showed an ability to jump routes on the perimeter, to be disruptive at the catch point. He's a physical press corner, likes to get his hands on the receiver early, jamming and rerouting his man off the ball, does a good job in trail technique, following just off the receiver's hip before driving on the ball with a quick closing burst, using that length to get a hand in and make a play on the football. Can also break quickly on the ball and off coverage. But again, that aggressiveness can get him into trouble. You'll see him he'll be susceptible to some double moves as well. He does like to come down and run support, though he doesn't always take the proper angle to the football. Needs to refine his footwork a little bit. Too many false steps in his play on the outside will make it difficult for him to play in phase at times. Also has trouble with his balance at the top of the route. Will lose contact with the receiver as he's tracking the ball to the inside. But I think when you're talking about AJ Terrell and you're looking at what's going to be the right value, I'm looking at him. Tennessee's pick in round number 2 is at number 61 overall. AJ Terrell feels like that's about right for him. 6'1", 195, the junior out of Clemson, going to Tennessee there in round number 2 makes a lot of sense to me. Staying on day 2 and moving on to the 3rd round now, I mentioned the fact that they need to find a 3 technique to take over for Jeffrey Simmons. Potentially a 5 technique or a 3 technique. And I think really what can happen is you can take Jeffrey Simmons and still keep him at the 5 technique and bring a guy like Devon Hamilton out of Ohio State, 6'4", 320 pounds. I think that's going to be a guy that you could definitely slide in there for Tennessee. And if you look at them up front, they've got Daquan Jones at the nose tackle. They brought in Jack Crawford to man the defensive tackle position. Jordan Williams is also there at defensive tackle. So I think if Simmons stays there at the defensive end position, the 5 technique, then Crawford and Devon Hamilton, I think, would be a nice duo there at defensive tackle. Now, Devon Hamilton, not really the more heralded among the defensive linemen there at Ohio State, but just a guy who consistently got the job done. I think he's pretty athletic for a guy his size. A guy who was more of a role player, didn't always start, but still, managed 20 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in his career for the Buckeyes. And, at the combine, Hamilton, my computer's a step slow here. So ran a 5'1", 440, bench pressed 225, 33 times as well. So a guy who has a little bit of a short area burst coming off the ball and shows some exceptional power to his game. That upper body strength is something that he uses to his advantage, has pretty good hands, shoots gaps a little bit, can really, muscle his way into the backfield. So I feel like Devon Hamilton in round number 3, that's good value there for Tennessee. Moving on to round number 5, that's really where Tennessee has their next pick. In round number 4, they traded away their pick. So they won't be selecting in round number 4. They traded away to Pittsburgh, number 135 overall, went to Pittsburgh. So they're going to be drafting in the 5th round and 175 overall. I think you need to find another edge rusher. I think when you look at Tennessee and you have Harold Landry, you brought in Vic Beasley to team up with him. And Vic Beasley, obviously, you're not really sure what you're going to get. Is he going to replicate his sophomore campaign there where he went double-digit sacks for the Falcons? Really hasn't lived up to that since. And that's really the biggest concern that I have at the position is he going to really return to that type of form, or are you going to have a guy who's going to underachieve and not really live up to the billing? That's the biggest concern, and it's going to be interesting to see if Mike Vrabel can really bring that out of him. Landry signed through 2021, so you do have him there at the outside linebacker position. But look, I'm looking at trying to find other pass rushers, and I'm looking at Trevis Gibson out of Tulsa. And Gibson, I think this is a guy who's still pretty raw. I think he showed at the Senior Bowl his pad level getting too high, inconsistency with his hands at times as well. Really showed that he doesn't belong with his hand in the dirt. I think he needs to play in space, allow him coming off the edge, but the pass rush ability is absolutely there. 25 and a half tackles for loss, including 15 this past season, had 8 sacks in 2019 as well. So a guy who really knows how to get after the quarterback and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. Also has 8 forced fumbles, had 5 in 2018. So a guy who also knows what to do when he arrives at the football. So I'm looking at Gibson, 6'3", 261, definitely an athletic lineman coming off the edge. Bench press 225, 25 times. So he's got some decent strength to him as well. 6'3", 261, good size. I think this makes a lot of sense, especially sitting there in round number 5. Get a pass rusher. He is raw, but he does have some skills to work with there. And I think Mike Vrabel would be happy to bring a guy like that in, especially there in round number 5. So no picks in round 6, but they do have 3 in round number 7. And I think this is really where they go offense, offense, offense. So the first offensive position, I have them go on receiver, and I'm having them look at Kalijah Lipscomb out of Vanderbilt, staying in state, going with the Vanderbilt receiver, and Kalijah, 6 foot 207, ran a 4.57 40 at the combine. Not going to be the explosive burner by any means, but Lipscomb, a season ago was a guy that was really talked about as one of the SEC's top receivers, had 87 catches, over 900 yards and 9 touchdowns. This past season, though, Vanderbilt's offense just really struggled and just had 47 catches for just 511 yards and 3 touchdowns. Not much of a factor. So really, you had to watch more of the 2018 tape to really get a feel for what Lipscomb can do. The biggest thing that you look at there is just 11.9 yards per reception in his career. So definitely not a guy who's going to stretch defenses, but I think he's definitely a savvy player, knows how to get open, savvy route runner. When you already have a team with Corey Davis, and A.J. Brown on the outside, you've got Adam Humphries there in the slot. I think looking for a possession receiver makes a lot of sense. And I think this would be a nice receiver who can work into and potentially make the roster and be a guy that they can use there in the passing game. Now, looking at running back, Derrick Henry, he's back. But they don't have really a proven backup. David Fluellen, Dalen Dawkins looking to take the place of Dion Lewis, who left in free agency, left to the Giants. So they could easily go with a running back earlier in the draft. But I waited until round number 7, and I think they can get one of the sleepers of the draft in Jermichael Hasty out of Baylor. This is a guy who I'm a fan of, and I know that the Senior Bowl absolutely is a fan of his as well. Jim Nagy talks about Hasty and his ability to make plays. He's got some explosiveness to him. Ran a 4.55 40 at the combine, 39-inch vertical leap, very explosive, moves very well laterally, and that was really on display in the short shuttle. Ran a 4.03 short shuttle, which was the fastest among the running backs who actually did the drill. Not everyone did the drill, but 4.03 is exceptionally fast. So he's quicker than fast, 5'8", 205. I think he can be a complement to Derrick Henry's power game. And when you look at Hasty at Baylor, the type of production for him, not a guy who has a ton of wear, shared the backfield quite a bit there with the Bears, just 386 carries. But a guy who knows how to catch the football out of the backfield, 79 receptions in his career. So a guy, I think you're going to see him come in on some of the passing downs, much like Dion Lewis did. I think that'd be a guy who, can move in and potentially earn that backup job there. And then I decided to look at that quarterback position for their final pick in the seventh round. And you've got Tannehill and you've got Logan Woodside on the roster. You need another quarterback. And I played around with a few different quarterbacks here. I looked at Jake Luton. Just didn't really fit what the Titans want to do. I looked at Steven Montez, athletic quarterback, but I think there's some inconsistency to his game as well. So I'm looking at Cole McDonald out of Hawaii. Cole McDonald, 6'3", 215 pounds. The junior, if you listen to my podcast during the season, I talked about this guy. He started off the year very disappointing. Most of his interceptions were thrown in the first couple of games. Had 4 in the opener against Arizona. Was actually benched in favor of Chevin Cordero, the freshman, and he bounced back. And this was a guy who led Hawaii to the bowl game. Just under 64% completion percentage. He had been a career, 50, looks like about 58% completion percentage prior to 2019, over 4,000 yards, 4,135 to be exact, 33 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. But again, a guy who I thought as the season progressed, really put his skills on display. And, I'm looking at him. He has this really long windup. And that's the thing that I think for him, if he's going to get drafted, he's going to have to show teams that, look, I can throw the ball down the field with accuracy. I can make these throws. I can I have a big arm. I can throw the ball down the football field as well. But the biggest thing for Cole McDonald is that throwing motion. Can he shorten it up? Because if you have that long looping motion, then you don't have that quick release, and if you can't get rid of the football in this day and age, you're really going to be in trouble. So I look at him, and had 7 games with 3+ touchdowns, had 3 400-yard games, had 6 touchdowns against Navy. He's a guy to me that, and that was in 2018. I look at Cole McDonald, a guy that down the stretch for Hawaii was really a guy that performed well. And I'm stalling a little bit because I'm trying to bring up what he did down the stretch. And so in his final few games against San Diego State, Army, Boise State, and BYU, this was a guy who, of the 14 interceptions threw just 2, but in those games he had eight touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. And they won 3 out of those 4 games. The only loss coming to Boise State. And that was in the Mountain West Championship game. And so that was a loss there. But outside of that, look, and that was the only game where he was under 60% completion percentage. And, just a kid who continues to develop. And the last time we saw him in a Hawaii Warrior uniform, threw for 493 yards and 4 touchdowns to beat BYU in the Hawaii Bowl. A kid who I think is going to get drafted because of his ability to rebound. I thought that was one of the things that you really saw out of him. Really continued to work on his craft, and I think that's one of the things that I think he's going to get that throwing motion shortened up a little bit. And if he can do that, I think he can absolutely make the roster, and not only do that, but challenge Logan Woodside for that backup job. So that takes care of Tennessee. We're going to go ahead and move on to the Indianapolis Colts. And as I mentioned, Indianapolis does not have a first-round pick because they traded that away to San Francisco. Got Got their guy, though, DeForest Buckner in there at the 3 technique, the defensive tackle position. And, that makes a ton of sense for them. So what are they going to do in round number 2? I think they need to find a receiver. And I think they're probably going to, like I said, potentially trade back into round number 1. They're going to need to, if they want to get that quarterback that they desperately need, in my opinion. But I think that first pick is going to be a receiver. And here's why. You've got T.Y. Hilton, and then you have everybody else. Essentially, you've got Zach Pascal, who I thought stepped up really well. The guy, kid out of Old Dominion. Paris Campbell battled injuries. And then after that, there just really isn't a whole lot of production there at the receiver position. And so when I look at the receiving, you've got depth at the position. They could potentially look at getting a receiver later on in the draft. But I think you want to try to get one of the top 10 wideouts if you're sitting there with 2 picks in round number 2. And at 34 overall, I have them taking Michael Pittman Jr. out of USC, 6'4", 223 pounds. I think the biggest concern was, can he separate from defenders down the football field? And Pittman ran a 4.52 40 at the combine, and he is plenty fast getting down the football field. He was the leading receiver in the Pac-12 conference this past season, 101 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Just put on the Utah game. Just put on the Utah game, and you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of the explosiveness. A guy who does a tremendous job getting vertical, and even if he doesn't have much separation, he'll create that late separation. He has a knack for being able to kind of extend his arm just a little bit to create that doesn't push off, create just a little bit of separation there at the end. And with his leaping, he also jumps and high points the football, but he's also extending away from the defender to really allow himself to attack that football in the air. Full extension, a guy who has a tremendous catch radius, but then he's so difficult to bring down. That was one of the things. Utah had a hard time tackling this kid, and that's really what he continued to do throughout the year. And teams like Washington really geared their defense around stopping Michael Pittman. And USC has tremendous receivers all the way across the board. They had Tyler Vaughns. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Drake London's really came on as well. But teams were so focused on Michael Pittman Jr. Those are the type of receivers that you want to look for. Are there defenses that are scheming to take away the number 1 wideout on this team? And there weren't too many guys in college football that could say that. Michael Pittman Jr. was absolutely that guy. I think there is a chance that Pittman Jr. could go into round number 1. And I'm looking at San Francisco at 13. I think if the Jets go at 11, go receiver, and they go CeeDee Lamb, then I think, or Jerry Jeudy, then I think, the Raiders at 12 will get a receiver, whoever's still on the board, whether it's Jeudy or Lamb. And then sitting there at 13, I think at that point, you probably have the 49ers going CJ Henderson, who I currently have going to the Jets. So if CJ Henderson goes 13 overall to the Niners, they're going to need to get a number 1 wide receiver at some point. I think Pittman Jr. could be that guy at number 31 overall. If not, then I think Indianapolis sitting there at 34, that'd be a heck of a compliment there for T.Y. Hilton on the outside as well. So I mentioned the quarterback position. And again, Phillip Rivers, they signed him after the illustrious career there in San Diego and Los Angeles, but it was time to move on. And Rivers he signed a 1-year deal, 1-year, $25 million contract. So he's going to be on the roster there, but you've got Brissett on the roster, and Brissett just didn't wow anybody. He just didn't. And unfortunately, that's not going to get things done. So you're looking at Jordan Love, the quarterback out of Utah State, and I think Jordan Love absolutely projects as a potential first-round quarterback. And I'm looking at Indianapolis, and they have the 2 second-round picks, and I think they can potentially package some picks together to trade into round number 1 and target Jordan Love. I think there's still a chance that the Chargers could potentially go with Jordan Love, and then you'd have Justin Herbert sitting there. Either way, I think that you're going to see the Colts make a move. I think Brissett had his chance, and I think that this is ultimately the right move for them. And when you look at Love, I thought he turned heads as a true sophomore in 2018. 64% completion percentage, throwing for over 3,500 yards, 32 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. Led Utah to an 11-2 record and a bowl victory in the New Mexico Bowl. Finished the season ranked number 22 in the FBS. Aggies' high-powered attack scored at least 40 points in 9 other 13 contests, featuring 7 players with at least 20 receptions, along with the 1,000-yard rusher in Darwin Thompson. Now with the Chiefs, ascending prospect at the end of the season, showing off his arm strength, athleticism outside the pocket, also tremendous touch and accuracy. But 2019 was really difficult for Love. The team had to replace 9 offensive starters, including 4 all Mountain West Conference offensive linemen, along with his head coach, Matt Wells, moving on to Texas Tech, took his offensive coordinator with him. In comes Gary Anderson, lost 5 leading receivers, including Thompson as well. They accounted for 170 receptions for over 2,300 yards and 28 touchdowns. In fact, his only returning receiver with 10-plus receptions was little 5'8" Jordan Nathan. So that led to just a 61% completion percentage, 3,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, but 17 interceptions. And he was also cited for marijuana just prior to the Frisco Bowl. So there are a lot of issues that were going on with Love, and I think he's hoping that teams will look past the miscues, because when you look at him, he's a natural passer, possesses that quick release, ball comes out in a hurry with tremendous velocity, confident passer, not afraid to use a variety of arm slots to fit the ball into tight windows. Attacks the middle of the field with precision, showing an ability to put the ball out in front of the receiver, to hit him in stride, has a touch to place the ball over defenders up the seam, has excellent ball placement on back shoulder throws as well, putting the passes outside and away from the corner, making it nearly impossible to defend. Can also put enough air under his deep ball so that his receivers can run into the pass and they don't have to break stride. I think the biggest issue in 2019 was his ability. He lacked anticipation, staring down his targets, and I think really he felt the pressure. This was a guy who, went from being a star for the Aggies to, he's got a brand new receiving core. He has a new coaching staff to deal with as well. He made it easy for defenders to really get a jump on the football. His consistency, in 2018, 8 multi-touchdown games, just 1 game with more than 1 interception, completed 60% of his passes in 10 of his 13 games. But in 2019, Love had 6 games with at least 2 touchdowns, but 5 games with multiple interceptions, completed 60% of his passes in just 7 of the 13 games, had 4 games with a completion percentage below 52%. But I think most of that drop in production was due to him just pressing, trying to do too much, trying to make plays when they aren't there. And I compare him, to Josh Allen and what he really had to go through there at Wyoming, losing a lot of his receivers, and really struggled with some of his production there as a junior there with the Cowboys. And I look at Jordan Love. I think he's a guy that, look, Phillip Rivers will be there for 1, maybe 2 years, and then Jordan Love can ultimately take over the reins there as the starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. Sitting there in round number 3 now. The Colts, this just feels like a Chris Ballard pick. You have Malik Hooker at the free safety position. You need a strong safety. And I'm looking at Kyle Duggar out of Lenoir-Rhyne, and this just feels like, like a guy that would come in and start right away. When you think about, he was the guy that found Darius Leonard in round number 2 out of, South Carolina State. And a guy who was able to come on and has been a star in the league. And I think that Duggar has similar capability. A guy, he's 6'2", 220 pounds, had 237 tackles in his career, but really it's the ball skills. 10 interceptions, 36 pass breakups, had 6 forced fumbles and 6 fumble recoveries in his career as well. Was also a punt returner. Had 6 punt returns for touchdown in his career. Now look, Lenoir-Rhyne is not an FBS program, and it's certainly not the NFL. So there is a big jump in competition, and that's one of the things. When you look at Nasir Adderley moving on from Delaware, that's where you have some cause for concern. And can he play at that level? But look, he's a tremendous athlete. I think 3rd round feels right for him, and I think that'd be a heck of a selection there for the Colts. Moving on to the running back position in round number 4. I'm looking at Marlon Mack. You have Naeem Hines in the backfield, then there's Jordan Wilkins. But I think getting a guy who's explosive. How about Darrington Evans out of Appalachian State? This is a guy who just explosive. I think that's one of the things that jumps off to you. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, but really had a breakout 2019 campaign. Over 1,400 yards on the ground, 18 touchdowns, also had 21 receptions on the year as well with another 5 touchdowns. And when you look at Evans, at the combine, really made a name for himself there as well. Ran a 4.41 40, put up 225 20 times, had a 37-inch vertical leap, did a little bit of everything. He showcased the fact that he can be a burner, can be a home run threat, has that speed. Also in the kick return game, had 3 kickoff returns for a touchdown in his career. And he's only a junior, so he came out a year early. And I remember at the beginning of this process when he declared, I was worried about him potentially getting lost in the shuffle, because I think that he is a guy who can be a factor at the next level. And his performance at the combine really put his name out there. And I think he's not going to be a guy that's going to be forgotten, certainly after running that 4.41, which is among the fastest among all the guys there at the combine at the running back position. So I think Evans is a nice pick there that can really be that backup for Marlon Mack. And, looking at round number 5, I think you need to find another tight end. Eric Ebron is gone. So you have just Jack Doyle at the tight end position, and really haven't done a whole lot there to replace Ebron, which to me is signifies the fact that they're going to be looking at potentially getting a tight end in the draft. And I'm looking at Jared Pinkney. This is a guy who, look, as a junior, Pinkney was a guy that everyone was talking about as the top tight end prospect coming into 2019. 50 catches, 774 yards, and 7 touchdowns. In 2019, again, the Commodore offense really struggled, played in just 8 games, 20 catches, 233 yards, just 2 touchdowns. This is a guy who has played an entire season just once, and that was in that 2018 campaign. Then he shows up at the combine and, just frankly, had a disappointing performance. 4.96 40, did put up 225 23 times, but just didn't look like the athlete that everyone was expecting him to be. 6'4", 257. I think he blocks really well. And he did show, like I said, in 2018 that he has pretty good hands. And so I'm looking at the 5th round, and I think that feels about right for Pinkney right now. He's not the top tight end prospect, not by a long shot, but I think the Colts at this point, looking at addressing some of those other areas and finding some of those other needs. If Pinkney can live up to that, what he did in 2018, and he can really return to that form, I think he can end up being a steal there in day 3. So looking at round number 6, I think they end up addressing the defensive line. And with Indianapolis, they have Kimoko Toure and Justin Houston there at the defensive end positions right now. Ben Banagou and Al-Qadim Muhammad also there up front. I think they need to go with one more pass rusher, really round out that group. And I'm looking at Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff out of Memphis, 6'3", 255, 18 sacks in his career for the Tigers, also 39.5 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles, 3 pass breakups in his career as well. A guy coming off the edge. We didn't get to see him at the combine, was not invited, but a guy who I think has some scheme versatility as well. He can play defensive end and probably drop in as a linebacker as well. But a guy who's just sneaky good getting after the quarterback coming off the edge. And I kind of like the pick. I think this is a guy who, if he can showcase some of that pass rush ability, I think he's someone who's just, they're going to have to keep him on the field. So at 194, they go Huff, and then Indy has another pick. in round number 6, and that's at 198, getting that pick from Dallas. And I think they go Raekwon Williams out of Michigan State, 6'4", 308. Really a high cut guy. I think that's one of the things that you definitely see. And because of that, he struggles with his center of gravity and struggles with his pad level. And that's really what stifles any type of a movement in his game. But when he fires low off the ball, he can be exceptionally disruptive. He could potentially come off the board much sooner than the 6th round, but I think some of that consistency to him, I thought that he just looked like an average athlete at the combine as well. That was one of the things that kind of worried me when I watched him. He is really high cut, and then so watching him in some of the drills just didn't really look natural with any of his bend. Ran a 5.04.40, which isn't bad for a guy his size. Just 25.5-inch vertical leap, and just 101 inches in the broad jump, 7.72 3-cone drill. So just a lot of numbers that weren't all that impressive, at the defensive tackle position. And look, you're not talking about a guy who's going to be running the ball for 40 yards or running, down the field 40 yards, but you're still looking for some of that lower body explosiveness, and he didn't really offer a whole lot of that. So I really want to see him, with his production, 29 tackles for loss, 11 and a half sacks, 8 pass breakups in his career, also 3 forced fumbles. A guy, look, in 2018 had 50 tackles at the defensive tackle position, 48 in 2019. So very active as well. It's just there are concerns about his athleticism, and that's really the biggest thing for me that could dissuade teams from taking him earlier than the 6th round. I think it feels right, because when you look at Indy, they have Buckner, then there's Grover Stewart at nose tackle. You've got Danico Autry, Sheldon Day, a lot of guys on that roster who don't weigh 300 plus pounds. So you get a guy like Raekwon Williams at 308, add some more size to that line. Indy can get pushed around on the inside, because they were more of a speed team. You get some more power there on the middle, and if Raekwon Williams can really fire off the ball and keep his pad level low, he can anchor at the point of attack and absorb some of those blockers. So finally, we're going to move on to Houston, and again, they don't have a first round pick. They traded that away, and so you're looking at Houston, round number 2. Which receiver is going to be available? That's really going to be the biggest question, because I think they have to go with the receiver with their first pick. And I'm looking at Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State, 6', 205. Ayuk ran a 4.540 at the combine. One of the things that you see from him is he's got some of the longer arms at the receiver position, over 33.5 inches. 40-inch vertical leap as well. So when you're talking about the catch radius, he absolutely has that. And look, Ayuk at Arizona State this past season, because he did only spend 2 years there with the Sun Devils, 65 catches, 1,192 yards, which is 18.3 yards per reception, and 8 touchdowns on the year. And so when you take that guy, he has that ability to stretch defenses a little bit. And you're looking at Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, Randall Cobb, as your top 3 receivers there in Houston. And, some guys that can be vertical threats, but I don't think any of them have the playmaking ability that Brandon Ayuk has. A guy that can be explosive on the outside, can move inside, and he's not going to be DeAndre Hopkins, but I think he can absolutely be that number 1 receiver that they're desperately looking for at this point. So Houston, after Ayuk, you're looking at defensive end position potentially. And when I look at Houston at the defensive end position right now, they've got J.J. Watt, obviously, but not a whole lot beyond him. There's Angelo Blackson, Charles Omenihu is a prospect that I like, but I think you need to find another defensive end. And I'm looking at Marlon Davidson, out of Auburn. I think this is a nice pick sitting there in round number 2 towards the end. And Davidson, very active, tremendous athlete, ran a 5.04.40 at 6'3", 303. He actually bulked up for the combine and showed that he can be an athlete, despite adding that additional size. So I thought that was absolutely impressive. A guy who, was able to bend surprisingly coming off the edge despite his size, 11 and a half tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks in 2019, had 28 tackles for loss and 14.5 sacks in his career, 9 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries for his totals as well. A guy who can be extremely powerful coming off the edge, but he played defensive end there at Auburn, and really I think he's going to be a 5 technique in the 34 defense, and you put him opposite J.J. Watt, it just makes a lot of sense to me. So moving on, looking at another pick on day 2, I'm looking at Darrell Taylor, the linebacker out of Tennessee, 6'4", 267 pounds. And the reason for that is if you look at Houston, they have Whitney Merciless. And then after that, you've got Brennan Scarlett, Duke Ejiofor, Jacob Martin. But I think they need another pass rusher. They need a guy who can really come off the edge, and that's one of the things that Darrell Taylor is absolutely able to do. He struggled against Jedrick Wilkes, who really dominated him the entire game, but this is still the guy who can bend coming off the edge, uses his hands pretty well. 26 and a half tackles for loss, but 19 and a half sacks, including at least 8 sacks in each of the last 2 seasons. A guy who bends very well. I think he's going to be a guy who's more of a situational pass rusher. That's really his staple, was getting to the quarterback, being able to really just let things go, extremely quick coming off the football, and can turn that corner, get to the edge in a hurry. So I think that makes a lot of sense for Houston sitting there in round number 3. And round number 4, I'm looking at that center position. I think that's one of the areas that they could potentially upgrade. There's Nick Martin sitting there right now. And I think Houston, with Martin, he's signed through 2023. I'm sorry, 2022, signed a 3-year, $33 million contract, but I still think that's an area that they could potentially upgrade. I think Max Sharping, was one of my favorite tackles in last year's draft. I'm happy that he's starting at the left guard position, but they also need an upgrade there at the right guard position. Zach Fulton has struggled, and I think that's an area that they really need to improve upon. And so I'm looking at Nick Harris out of Washington. Harris isn't the biggest guy. He's just 6'1", and 300 pounds. But ran a 5'1" 40 at the combine, and a guy who was a leader there for the Huskies up front. From his time, from the time that he was a freshman, Nick Harris was the guy that came onto that, and it was really more Nick Harris more so than Trey Adams or Caleb McGarry. It was Nick Harris that everyone talked about. And this guy, was kind of that junkyard dog there in the middle, really, a guy, a presence there at the pivot, but he also has experience at guard. So I think you could actually put him in at the guard position there, take over for Zach Fulton potentially. And Nick Martin, I still have some concerns there, and you could potentially move him over there to that center position. So in round number 5, I did mention that they did make that trade for David Johnson. You've got Duke Johnson there as well as kind of that pass catcher, but Karan Higdon as another back there. I'm looking there. I think they need another running back. To be perfectly honest with you, and I'm looking at LaMichael Pirine out of Florida. And Pirine, for me, he ran a 4.62 40, not all that impressive, but he did have a 35-inch vertical leap. So he's quicker than he is fast. Did bench press 225 22 times as well. So he has some strength, some upper body strength to him as well. But what really jumps off the film when you watch LaMichael Pirine, he has good vision and his cutback ability as a runner. So that really, when you look at the combine, and I talked about the combine really being an area where you can validate what you saw on game film, and that really rings true with Pirine. But the hands, 72 receptions, including 40 this past season, 5 touchdowns in the passing game. He has limited wear on his legs because he shared the backfield with a number of running backs, just 493 carries, just over 2,400 yards and 22 touchdowns in his career on the ground. I think that this is a guy that can be a weapon in the passing game for them as well as on the ground. You already have Duke Johnson there, and I think you add LaMichael Pirine to that group, and that really gives Deshaun Watson another weapon out of the backfield. And David Johnson and Duke Johnson are only signed through 2021. So I think adding LaMichael Pirine is a bit of insurance there, and being able to land a running back like Pirine in the 5th round would be a nice selection. And then, they don't have a pick in round number 6. So moving on to round 7, they have 3 picks in round 7. And I think they go defense, defense, defense. Absolutely. I think they need another pass rusher. As we mentioned previously, I think they double up there. And I'm looking at Tipa Nalai. Tipa Nalai out of Utah State. A guy who can be a defensive end if he needs to put his hand on the ground, but I think he really is going to excel coming off the edge in space, and had really a breakout 2018 campaign, much like Jordan Love did there for the Aggies. 64 tackles, 13 and a half going for loss, 10 sacks, a couple of interceptions as well, 3 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, and the future really looked bright for him. But you saw a drop off in production, just 9 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. A big part of that again, the coaching staff, that change really kind of threw things off for a number of guys on the roster. But I think this is a guy that can still come off the edge. He has pretty good length, 6'5", 235, a little light. Could probably, he has the frame to put some more weight and not really compromise some of that speed. And that gives them another pass rusher off the edge. I think at the nose tackle position, they have to find some depth at the position. They have Eddie Vanderdoes right now kind of penciled in as potentially the starter. Brandon Dunn as another possibility. I think they need to find another nose tackle. And I'm looking at John Pennicini there out of Utah. Now, Pennicini, he's 6'1", 318 pounds. He played alongside Leki Fotu, who really played the nose tackle position. But I think that Pennicini could absolutely be that nose tackle as well. He was quick off the ball, quicker than I was really expecting him to be. What's funny is he was actually, I think his measurements for Utah, 6'2", 333 pounds. So he slimmed down quite a bit for the combine. If those measurables were accurate, slimmed down for the combine, a guy who, 15 tackles for loss and 5 sacks in just 3 seasons with the Utes, and he wasn't really asked to be that guy that was going to wreak havoc because he had Bradley and he had Leki Fotu, he had Francis Bernard behind him. This is a guy who's going to take up a lot of blockers, very physical at the point of attack, and a guy who has some short area quickness and can get into the backfield and pressure quarterbacks. And I think that's one of the things when you watch Utah play, you saw Leki Fotu, you saw Pennicini getting into the backfield and affecting the quarterbacks. Not always on the stat sheet, but if you watch those games, you saw them making some of those plays. And so I think that's going to bode well for his draft stock. And then looking at the corner position in round number 7, Houston, they have Bradley Roby, they have Lonnie Johnson, they have Vernon Hargraves, they have Garyon Conley. So I think you're really set with 4 corners there. There's going to be a battle for that 5th cornerback. They have Phillip Gaines on the roster as well. I'm looking at Josiah Scott out of Michigan State, and Josiah Scott, he's a I actually had him coming off the board in the 5th round at one point, going to Denver, and moved him around. 22 pass breakups in his career, 6 interceptions. I think he's probably going to come off the board before the 7th round. And so when it's all said and done, I'd probably move Josiah Scott around and probably not keep him in round number 7, especially with Houston drafting at the end of round number 7 was really where I have him penciled in. And that was at number 251 overall, one of the compensatory selections. He is just 5'9", 185, so a guy who's really going to be playing in the slot at the next level. But I thought he was one of the better draft eligible prospects for the Spartans. So he can very easily come off the board much sooner. When you're looking at the draft class for the corners, that's the part that's going to be interesting is exactly where he falls. I think you look at that group in the 5th round, fifth, sixth range. That's probably going to be where Josiah Scott's going to fall when it's all said and done. So I don't think this is going to be a pick that I'm going to hold on to for all that long. But, that's where I have him penciled in the East right now. So that does it for the AFC South. So next week, and really when I say next week, it's going to be later on this week. I'm used to saying next week, but we actually have a podcast every couple of days leading up to the draft. We're less than 3 weeks away from the draft, so we want to be putting out as many podcasts as possible to really get you ready for the NFL draft. And so we've got the NFC West next week. And there I did it again. But next podcast in a couple of days, we're going to go ahead and look at the NFC West. And when you're talking about the NFC West, you've got Arizona, the Cardinals. Are they going to go receiver? Not anymore when you got DeAndre Hopkins. So I think they have to protect Kyler Murray. They're going to go offensive tackle. Whoever it's going to be on the board. Is it going to be Jedrick Wills? Is it going to be Mekhi Becton? Is it going to be Tristan Wirfs? That's really going to be the discussion there for the Cardinals. You also have Seattle. What's the situation with Jadeveon Clowney? If you don't get Clowney, I think this pick has to be a defensive end. It's going to be probably Yetur Gross-Matos out of Penn State. But if they do ultimately re-sign Clowney, and it's looking more and more like the market is coming down for him and he's lowering his price tag, that he's probably going to re-sign with Seattle, that's going to allow them to potentially look at that offensive tackle position and really focus on what they're going to do there at tackle. Dwayne Brown isn't getting any younger. They lost George Fant. They did bring in Brandon Shell, but is he really the answer at right tackle? I think Seattle could potentially go offensive tackle in round number 1. San Francisco trading up to the number 13 overall pick. I think they go receiver unless Lamb and Judy are off the board. Then they go corner, and then sitting there at 31 overall, if they go corner, they'll go receiver, possibly Michael Pittman. But I think if they get their receiver in at number 13. They could potentially address the interior of that offensive line. Who is the guy that I'm targeting for them at the number 31 overall if they do get the receiver at number 13? We'll talk about that here in a couple of days. And then the Rams, without a first-round pick, really limited in terms of free agent, the cap ability. They released Todd Gurley. I think they have to address the running back position. They have to get better up front offensively as well. Andrew Whitworth is coming back, but and there's a big but there. He is getting really long in the tooth, so he's one of those guys probably only going to be around for another year. Losing some of the guys up front after their Super Bowl performance, that's really hurt them. So I think they have to address the offensive line. They need to address the cornerback position. They have to address potentially the safety position, inside backer. And look, Greg Zuerlein's gone. So I think you potentially have to also get a kicker. So Rodrigo Blankenship out of Georgia, we may actually be talking about a kicker in this draft. That's really, the Rams, it's going to be interesting. They're going to be opening up SoFi Stadium. They want to be able to put a good product out there, but I think it could be one of those years where they struggle. And we won't be seeing that at Super Bowl, offense coming from Sean McVay. But it remains to be seen what Sean McVay is going to do. He's one of the better head coaches in the league, so be interesting to see what happens. So that's it for episode 30. Hard to believe we've already been through 30 episodes. Episode 31, I'm going to get it released hopefully here in the next day or two and talk about the NFC West. We'll do the AFC West after that. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the positions. We'll do positional breakdown and try to get through as many positions as possible in each podcast. Really take a look at the positions and where I see the number of players going at each position, kind of take a look at the history of the position a little bit and, where I see some of these guys falling and break it down from there. So hope everybody has a great week. Stay tuned for more podcasts for Ready for the Draft. And we'll go ahead and call it a night. So this is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com. This has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. Take care, everyone, and I am out of here.